Well, it's not exactly clear what Wang Yi meant by that comment, but if you think about similar conference, I would think about the Russia-Ukraine ceasefire conference in Jeddah. Basically, which we had a few months ago, basically the idea would be to make this a international, with a focus on the global south kind of conference, moving it away from the US to something led by China and other countries. So it's not concrete yet, but I think that's a direction they would be thinking about.
Well, taking a step back, what about China's role as a potential mediator in this conflict? On one hand, Beijing is trying very hard to be taken seriously politically. It's trying to increase its soft power. But on the other hand, they are incredibly sympathetic to the Palestinians. How does that go in terms of making them a viable mediator?
So I think when we're trying to think about China's role in the Middle East and specifically about its role as a mediator, we need to understand that when China is talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it's not really thinking not about the Israelis and not about the Palestinians. It's thinking about its position in the region and about its position vis-a-vis the United States. So when we're talking about this specific proposal, for example, what China is trying to do is, one, tell the countries in the region that it can be an alternative to the US, and B, it's building on its success in March of bringing together Iran and Saudi Arabia and saying we can maybe do the same with the Israelis and the Palestinians. So it's a way to gain credit, but I don't think it has too much substance, at least not yet.
Obviously, something that they do hold major substance and credit with is the economy. So how would the latest Houthi Red Sea attacks be impacting China, a major economy? Right now, they're sitting on the sidelines of both the attacks and the retaliation by the West. Does she perhaps see the cost of involvement as greater than doing nothing?
That's a good question. I mean, you would think that China would have an interest in doing something about the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea, especially because China has been very vocal about its anti-piracy work in the past and contributions in the past. But here we see again this balancing with the United States. China doesn't want to be part of a U.S. coalition, and China wants to position itself in contrast to the U.S. On the other hand, now that they see that this is hurting Egypt's economic interests or other countries in the region, then we saw Wang Yi come out yesterday and say and call for an end to the Houthi attack. So I think there is some impact on China, but I think so far the geopolitical calculation is winning.
So does it seem likely going forward that something like this large-scale peace conference will be something that is viable? Will the Israelis and the Palestinians agree to it?
I think in terms of Israel, China has lost a bit of credibility in terms of being seen as a mediator. The Palestinians would agree to it, but really this is not about the conflict itself. It's about creating an international atmosphere, a regional atmosphere where China is seen as a credible player and a mediator. I don't think this will be actually helpful in bringing forward a solution to the conflict.
And in terms of the hostages, Noa Al-Gamani, one of the hostages that was being shown in one of the propaganda videos that was recently released, her mother is reported to have some kind of Chinese lineage or heritage. Is the government doing enough? As we were discussing here in studio, obviously this a major international issue, or at least should be, that these hostages are not ex-military, not in the reserves. Many of them are women, children, the elderly, and men under the age of 18. Surely China should be doing more if it really wants to flex its soft power by assisting with the hostages first and foremost.
Absolutely. I think China could have played a key role on the humanitarian front, right? It's not political, it's not taking side, and especially in this specific case, but China decided and chose to not play that role. And specifically in the case of Noa Al-Gamani, they were quite reluctant to really play a role, and they kind of were insinuating that maybe she's not Chinese, she doesn't have Chinese citizenship. And it was also quite interesting to see that China didn't do much to help Chinese citizens in Israel in the first days of the war. So China has really been trying to keep out of the whole situation, and only now we're seeing a shift. where as the war is moving to the next stage, China now sees an opportunity to be seen as more active. And I think it'll be interesting to see whether now China could push the hostages issue forward as part of a greater deal towards ending the war, towards a ceasefire. It's possible, but if we follow what China has done so far, I think it's unlikely.